Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Nuclear Task Force. We've got a great range of speakers here today, and we're looking to build this community around all things for the nuclear industry, which is so much more than just nuclear propulsion for our submarines. The AUKUS initiative is gaining momentum all around the world, it seems. With the AUKUS Forum, there's so much conversation around Pillar 2 activities, which is much more than just the build of the submarine. And today we'll touch on all things around the nuclear industry. Can I first acknowledge country right across Australia and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging right across this nation. Today I know we've got visitors joining in from the US and the UK, so welcome to everyone. This is a sellout event, which we're very chuffed about, and we're looking forward to expanding the nuclear conversation, not just in Australia, but right across the AUKUS nations. So first of all, I just want to introduce Brad from Aon. Aon, the global insurance company, are members of the AUKUS Forum, and Brad most recently joined myself and Kathy on a visit across Tasmania. We visited Hobart, Launceston and Burnie, and Brad was involved with some of those meetings to engage with local industry. But Aon are a great supporter of all things AUKUS. And Brad, you might just give us a few words around Aon's engagement with ensuring the global primes, but your support for SMEs here in this country.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Michael. It was great to join yourself and Kathy and the team down in Tasmania recently. But yeah, Aon's a very proud partner of AUKUS Forum. We are one of the largest insurance broking firms in the world, and certainly the biggest in regards to defence sector itself. And whilst we are the broker of choice for many of those large primes, as you mentioned, and we do various consulting work with the Department of Defence and other defence agencies around the world, we certainly have a keen focus on the small and medium enterprise in the sector and firms looking to join the sector, because the insurance challenges and contractual requirements are quite challenging from that point of view. So we certainly leverage on our local and global networks to make sure we can obtain those cover requirements for them, and obviously try and achieve a competitive price. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining us and thank you for the support. Today we've got a great range of speakers, as I mentioned. We have a nuclear lawyer, we have a mining engineer, and we also have a nuclear engineer. So this is great, and welcome to all of you. And we're looking forward to this engagement. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat. And then if there's anything in particular, our participants can contact you via email post the event. We'll also be putting this up on the AUKUS Forum YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see that later today. And if you've got any reason to reach out, please feel free to contact the AUKUS Forum with Kathy as the operations manager, and we can connect you to the various speakers and this engagement. But the plan is to continue doing this on the third Wednesday of every month at this time, and we may change times according to international speakers that are going to join us. So we're looking forward to all that. But for now, talking about nuclear law, we're very pleased to be joined by Kirsty Brabon, who's joining us today from Adelaide in South Australia. And Kirsty is a great member of the task force. You've got some international travel coming up, which you might touch on a bit too, Kirsty, but for now, I'll hand it over to you, and please feel free to share the screen.
All right. So my name's Kirsty Brabon. I am a nuclear lawyer, as Michael said. I run my own practice advising on nuclear law, but I'm also an academic at the University of Adelaide, and I run their nuclear law program. So nuclear law is a very, very large topic. So I'm only going to touch on a very small component of it because I only have 15 minutes. And so what I thought I would start with is right at the end of the nuclear fuel cycle, but on nuclear waste. And the reason I thought I'd start on that, it's quite topical at the moment. If anyone watched Senate estimates recently, and even the committee inquiry on the new naval nuclear regulator, there was a lot of discussion about waste. So I thought I would start there. So what I'm going to touch on in this very short period is what is nuclear waste, what is the waste disposal history in Australia, what is happening with waste today, and where to from here. And I'm going to be a little bit indulgent at the end and tell you also what the University of Adelaide is up to. So radioactive waste, nuclear waste, what is it? So nuclear waste is all around Australia. It's stored in over 100 different locations around Australia at the moment. Majority of the waste is actually stored at AUKUS Heights in Sydney, which is the home of the Opal medical reactor. And we talk about waste at the moment in cubic meters. And so I've got LLW being low level waste and ILW that are listed here on the screen on the left. Now I've got two numbers for low level waste because we technically have two reports in Australia that sort of say what we store, what we hold, and that is the Joint Convention report that our PANZA, our national nuclear regulator, puts up to the Atomic Energy Agency every couple of years. And so in that we say there's 4,000 or so, but also in the national inventory, which is prepared by the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency, says it's about 2,500. And the discrepancy actually comes down to the unknown quantities of contaminated soil, predominantly held by CSIRO. So we don't really actually know exactly how much waste we hold in Australia because it's all around Australia. And we have multiple regulators. So we have a national regulator, but also every state and territory have a regulator, and they also have their own individual inventories. So we don't really know exactly. And then intermediate level waste, we approximately hold 1,600 cubic meters, and all those numbers are based on 2020 figures. So to break down types of categories of waste, we tend to give them sort of easy to use names, but we predominantly refer to low level, intermediate and high level waste as the main categories. But the definition as to what waste is ultimately comes down to when nuclear material or radioactive materials or materials that have radiation have no future use. That's when we consider them to be waste. That can often be quite topical because some people think there's extra uses. They can be reprocessed, other things like that. I don't have time to get into all of that, and I'm not a technical person, so I'll stick to the law. But the sources of this waste and where they come from, we have what we call the TN81 canister. So that is the waste that comes from the Opal reactor that gets sent over to France, gets reprocessed, conditioned, and gets put into a canister and is sent back to Australia and safely stored in that. And that's currently stored at AUKUS Heights in Sydney. You've got the waste that comes from the medical reactors. We've got the MO99 waste. We've got medical waste in hospitals and universities, got contaminated soils. We have norms, which is normal occurring radioactive materials. And we have industrial wastes that come from mining, oil and gas, those sorts of industries. So what is the history of this in Australia? So Australia has predominantly tried to manage waste. It's been a really difficult topic for Australia for a very long time. So Australia sort of started mining at Radium Hill, which was the uranium mining in South Australia. But we started dealing with waste originally in the 1960s, which happened at the Little Forest site at AUKUS Heights, which is where the Australian Atomic Energy Commission at the time was doing experimental boreholes for the disposal of low-level waste. This started to become quite political, and as you'll see the theme in here, it continues to be political in 1978. And at that time, the Premier of Queensland decided they would like to transport waste to South Australia to Radium Hill, which was a decommissioned uranium site at the time. And they wanted to store their waste there. So it was co-located with other waste. Now, South Australia said no, and it started to become quite political at that time. And that's when the federal government came in and said, okay, well, we need to do something about this. It wasn't until 1985 that the states and territories got on board, and there was a national call for the states and territories to identify a suitable site for a nuclear waste facility. Now, that started with the Northern Territory. They found a site and said, all right, how about here? That was later withdrawn in 1991. And it wasn't due to technical difficulties, but actually stemmed from political considerations and community issues at the time. So then we go to a couple of years later, and they were trying to transport waste to ANSTO because there was waste already stored there. So once again, everyone's trying to put it all in the one location because that seemed to be the safest idea of storing it all in the one spot. So at that time, ANSTO had accepted 2,000 cubic meters of radioactive soil from Victoria, and there was plans to take on more. And that's when the court issued an order to stop ANSTO from taking any further waste. As you'll see from here, the court gets involved quite a bit. That's another theme with politics here. So you jump to 1998, and at the global level, there was a lot more interest in managing waste appropriately and safely. And that's when, at an international level, there was the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and the Safety of Radioactive Waste Material, and Australia signed that in 1998. Jump forward a couple more years, and Australia, once again, as federal government, was trying to find a site for a radioactive waste facility. And they originally started a search for defence land, and they narrowed it down to a couple of sites and found a location in the Woomera Protected Area in South Australia. Now, this once again became very political. The South Australian government was not overly keen on a waste facility in WPA. So what they tried to do was they tried to convert part of WPA into a conservation park. So it couldn't be a waste facility. That failed. So the federal government swooped in and compulsorily acquired the land. So then South Australian government swooped in and passed what we now know as the Prohibition Act in South Australia, which prohibits nuclear waste facilities in South Australia. But under law, the federal law will trump the state law. So that didn't quite work. So the state government of South Australia took the federal government to court, and they won. So that considered the land acquisition to be invalid, and therefore the federal government went back to the drawing board again. Jump 10 years, government went out again, tried to find some more land. This time they took a slightly different approach to land acquisition, and they went up to the Northern Territory and said, can you nominate Indigenous land that is operated by land councils? And that led to the government considering Muckaty Station in the Northern Territory. Once again, highly political, and ultimately ended up...
You start from the top.
Hi, James, you might need to mute yourself. And so that ultimately led to court action, and following an out-of-court settlement to do with Indigenous land issues, once again, Muckaty Station was scrapped. So South Australia then decided to do its own Royal Commission. That Royal Commission looked into a number of things in the nuclear fuel cycle, but also considered the possibility of a waste facility in South Australia, and whether that waste facility could take international waste and turn that into an economic stream for the South Australian government. Ultimately, that was not supported by the citizens' jury of that Royal Commission, and once again, that didn't go ahead. Now, jump to last year, and South Australia was considered once again for a waste facility. This time, it was a site in Kimba in South Australia known as Napandi. This federal government acquired that land voluntarily. It wasn't compulsory acquisition, and that was disputed in the federal court, and the government lost that court case, and ultimately the government came out last year and said that they will be abandoning the site and all sites considered during that selection process. So what does that mean? Where are we today? So what is the current policy of the government? Well, the government considers that waste disposal continues to be a priority of the government, but there is no policy position on that. So the current minister for this portfolio, Madeleine King, came out on the 10th of August and said in Parliament that the Kimba site would be abandoned, and so would the two other sites that were sort of selected or narrowed down to, which was Wallabadina and Lyndhurst. They would also not be considered. But the government has not come out since and said what their policy position is on waste disposal pathways. So what are the options? So the government, as I understand it, is putting together options to be presented to the government to be considered. We don't know what they are. Nothing publicly has been said about that. So where does AUKUS come in? So AUKUS was announced midway through this sort of Kimber process. But what we do know about AUKUS is the Defence Minister has come out and said that waste is important and waste solutions are important, but a solution is not expected till about 2050s. But in order to prepare for this, because government knows how long this stuff takes, they have already, last year they started a desktop review of potential defence sites for a waste facility. So where from here? What are some of the options that the government could consider? So, and this is just me coming up with random ideas. I'm not involved in what's being presented to the government, but this is some of the things the government could consider. So they could consider commercial build options. So rather than a government run project, they could contract it out. Similar to the way nuclear power plants are run by private entities, the government could engage a private entity to run and operate a facility, and the government could either fund it, or the project could be funded by the government paying for that waste to be stored or disposed there. Another option would be leveraging the existing infrastructure at Teles's sites. So you may or may not be aware, but there is a private company called Teles Holdings, and they currently operate a hazardous waste and nuclear waste facility in Western Australia. So they are licensed to take low-level radioactivity, and as you would have seen, low-level nuclear waste, radioactive waste, as you would have seen from my first slide. You know, that is the largest amount of waste that we hold in Australia. So they currently have a site that can take waste. There's legal reasons as to what they can and can't take from across Australia, because the laws can be quite complex and the jurisdictions are complex, but there is a site currently available for waste disposal. Teles are also pursuing a facility or a site in the Northern Territory for intermediate level waste, and considering deep geological storage and disposal options in the Northern Territory. And the sort of most recent announcement by that company in relation to that site was that they had gained consent from the traditional owners in that area to use that site for waste disposal, which is quite amazing. Another option could be the commingling of defence and civilian waste on defence land. So as you saw before, Defence are currently considering defence land for its waste associated with the submarines. So, you know, if they find an intermediate level waste storage or disposal facility for deep geological disposal, maybe we consider putting some of the civilian waste there as well. Another option the government could consider would be revisiting the land acquisition model. I know that, as you would have seen from my timeline before, the government has tried that many, many times and it has failed. But you know, they could consider making considerable amendments to that approach. And notably, a lot of the issues have been associated with community engagement and Indigenous land consultation and issues. So they could consider an approach taken by the Canadian government and adopt free and prior informed consent. So that's certainly another option the government can consider. So I've only got a couple of seconds left before I hit my 15-minute mark. So to be indulgent, the University of Adelaide, which I work as well, is running its first ever nuclear law course, and that'll run from the 1st to the 5th of July this year. It's predominantly focused on the submarines, and it is a course that has been requested by the Department of Defence, but it's open to anybody. If you want to learn more about it, you can just plug it straight into Google and you will find all the information on the University of Adelaide website. So it'll be run as a university course, but it'll also be run as a CPD. So you can enroll to do the week-long course and do it for learning, but not actually do any of the assessment pieces. So thank you. And there's all my details if you would like to get in contact with me. But thank you very much for your time.
That's great, Kirsty. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm really pleased with the advisory board for the Nuclear Task Force. You've all got such unique skills across the board, and it was great to catch up with you in Sydney just last month with Jamie Chaffee, who's the president of the Country Mayors Association. We had a great conversation around some of the things you've just touched on, but certainly the conversation needs to expand. We need to learn together so much more around the opportunity for the global nuclear industry. And this is where I first brought manufacturing companies together many years ago now, around looking at those global supply chains to get involved with nuclear. But when we start talking about the regulations and the prohibitions, it starts getting even more complex. Now, we're not going to take questions here in this live chat, but one of the chat questions came up was around, what if we don't get something up in Australia? Would that mean that we need to find somewhere in the US or the UK as a partner model? I guess that must be being discussed, but maybe it's fair, or maybe you don't have an opinion. What are we likely to get a facility up and running in Australia in the near term?
It's hard to say, right? Like, you know, what we've been trying since the 60s.
Yep.
I think we will get something up, but I think the government needs to really pivot and actually look at some of their past learnings. And as you saw from that timeline, it's sort of history repeating itself. You know, every approach to land acquisition over these decades has lost for very similar reasons, for very similar court actions. You know, government does need to start looking at, you know, is it best that government does this? Should we actually be looking at some of these more commercial options? Should we be sending this to TELUS? Should we be engaging private companies to build a facility on behalf of government and operate it as a commercial facility?
And
you know, there's some of the things we should be considering.
Sure. I think one of the interesting things is that technology never stands still. And so we're now seeing groupings come together around the national or international maritime industry and looking at maritime shipping having nuclear powered ships. That would be a game changer too. But again, it's only just happening as we speak. AUKUS itself is still very much new. And so you can never say never anymore. But when you start talking about maritime shipping in addition to defence and nuclear submarines, the game's shifting quickly, don't you think?
Yeah, it certainly increases the quantity of waste that we're going to have to deal with. I certainly think another thing that government and industry should be investing in is R&D into the reprocessing of waste, so that we can actually look at options to get potential future uses out of existing waste products, and actually to then also reduce the quantity of waste and potentially how long it needs to be disposed or shielded for.
Yeah.
That's something that, you know, governments are often quite scared of, but I think, you know, technology could be our friend in this space.
And we're already lining up speakers for our future summits like this. And we've got a company that's making nuclear batteries out of recycled medical waste isotopes. So again, technology never stands still. And I guess the advantage would be if we've got Australian researchers and Australian industry able to develop new technologies, we can all help to shift the game. So this is good. So Kirsty, thank you so much for joining us. And I know you're going to be involved with all the events moving forward. I know you've got some travel coming up too. So we look forward to your insights from your work coming up. But for now, we're going to shift gears and turn to critical minerals and uranium. And we welcome Claire Larkin-Sykes. All of your bios are up on the invite, so I'm not surprised we've had a sellout event. But Claire, you've got some great insights through your work. And so I'll hand it over to you to share the screen and talk about critical minerals and uranium in particular. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's great to be here. And I particularly like your comment that technology never stands still, because, you know, certainly from my background as a mining engineer and in the mining and energy industries and the mining equipment technology and services industries, that's certainly the case. And it's a very dynamic and evolving space and industry. So my name is Claire Larkin-Sykes. I have an advisory firm, For Light Advisory, and today I'm really just speaking a little bit more upstream, like speaking about a conversation starter on critical minerals. So today I was planning on just covering a few key topics. This is the start of a number of different sessions that Michael and the Nuclear Task Force and the AUKUS Forum are developing around knowledge sharing. So it's a fairly high-level presentation, but opens up the opportunity for some more in-depth or technical conversations in the future. So I was going to cover a few points, just getting to the bottom of what is a critical mineral, some of the policy planning and implementation developments underway at the moment in terms of international and national developments. Just touching on a little bit around what is Australia's critical minerals strategy, a question on uranium and its inclusion or developments in that space, and then opportunities to unlock Australia's critical minerals potential. So in terms of what is a critical minerals? It is effectively a mineral that is essential to the economic and national security of a country. It has a supply chain that is vulnerable to disruption, and it serves as an essential function in the manufacturing of modern technologies that are also vulnerable to disruption or in the absence of, which would have significant consequence. So designated critical minerals are quite broad in their application. They could be included in industries such as electronics, clean energy technologies, aerospace technologies, or defence systems. And examples of critical minerals also vary significantly by jurisdiction, but typically could include minerals such as rare earth elements, or REEs, which is a group of 17 elements that are used in the manufacture of high-strength magnets, electronics and military equipment. Lithium and cobalt, as an example, essential for lithium-ion batteries, used in electric vehicles and other electronics. Nickel, some jurisdictions designate copper, vital for applications including EVs, renewable energy systems and transmission infrastructure, or minerals such as graphite, which are used in batteries, fuel cells, or as a lubricant, or other minerals that are used in membrane technologies. So they are used across a range of applications, so incredibly diverse in their application: EVs, batteries, permanent magnets, solar voltaics, hydrogen electrolyzers, and other energy efficient technologies. So the importance of the critical mineral space is that they typically arise from their irreplaceable role in these important industrial applications, and the potential risks associated with their supply chains, such as things like the geography related to their production, or political instability in key producing regions, or there are just limited substitution options. So I guess importantly, supply chains in general operate more efficiently when they're diverse and transparent. So the risk of disruption to critical mineral supply chains are certainly heightened when mineral production or processing is concentrated in certain locations, facilities, or indeed companies, or where their movement or trade flows are fragile, volatile, or unreliable. So while critical minerals typically have an important role in industrial applications, it's their actual vital role in new technology and new emerging technologies that's particularly sparking sort of this evolving and rapidly changing demand growth against some of these minerals, and also the supply risk related to some of the demand growth around these technologies, then bring up questions and issues around geological scarcity or geopolitical issues in terms of their extraction. And one of the examples of that is, for example, iridium is a very only a very small production globally, but it's very concentrated in one jurisdiction in the world, and it's a critical component in hydrogen electrolyzers, or a certain type of hydrogen electrolyzer. So that's an example of a supply chain that could be very limited and certainly very disrupted, and it's a critical factor in terms of enabling large-scale hydrogen industries, as an example. So the economic security and supply chain reliability of critical minerals is certainly gaining a lot of attention, and also, governments are intervening to ensure that there's no negative impacts of trade dependence, and also to boost resilience within their jurisdictions. And really, that is the key reason why critical minerals lists and critical mineral strategies do vary by jurisdiction, because they're very much intertwined with the priorities and policy priorities of the day. So a little bit about some of the key jurisdictions that have stated critical mineral strategies. As I mentioned, every driver will be different in terms of policy drivers, and trade flow drivers, and other drivers in terms of industrial policy by jurisdiction. So therefore, each critical mineral strategy will be different. And there's also a huge range of critical mineral strategies around the world, whether that be groups of countries, whether it be national strategies, or whether that be state-based strategies as well, which also very much exist depending on jurisdictions. So I guess just touching on a few of the differences. So for example, the United States focuses very much on the dependency of foreign critical minerals and as inputs into their own defence, energy, electronics and automotive industries. So they're very much focused on funding domestic mining and processing projects, as well as establishing partnerships with allied countries and investing in research and development for recycling and alternative materials. And notable initiatives are, of course, the Defence Production Act and to support domestic critical production. Like the UK, for instance, is very much about securing critical mineral supplies by diversifying their sources, enhancing domestic capabilities, and promoting global standards around responsible sourcing. And some of their key initiatives include the Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre, investing in recycling research, strengthening international partnerships, and advancing green trade practices. The EU strategy is embedded within broader green transition and raw material policies and raw material inputs. And it's about securing a supply of responsible supply chain in terms of their raw material inputs. And there's various initiatives going on there, including the European Raw Materials Alliance. China has a very well established and mature strategy, and it does control a significant portion of the global supply chain for many critical minerals, notably in the processing, so not just upstream, but in the actual processing and refining phase. So they have been investing heavily in their mining and processing, both domestically and internationally. Canada has some similarities to Australia in that it's a very resource-rich nation, and it's very much emphasised around the development of their abundant natural resources, and also the promotion of their mining sector and their upstream sector as environmentally responsible and socially sustainable, and very much around the technology around responsible mining practices and building relationships with key allies. And they have a Canadian critical minerals strategy. Japan, on the other hand, is focused very much on diversifying its critical minerals to avoid supply disruptions, and that's particularly for their technology and automotive sectors, investing in recycling programs and looking at alternate material research, and also securing long-term agreements, as well as India, which is also focusing on their upstream capabilities and also their economic self-reliance. So Australia is really focused on leveraging what it has, its rich natural resources, its abundance in natural resources, and it's about being a key global supplier and focusing on responsible mining practices and leveraging our extremely strong capabilities in upstream development of critical mineral supply. And it also is focusing on both the exploration technologies, but also processing, moving further down the supply chain into processing facilities, and also unlocking manufacturing capabilities as well. So a little bit more about Australia. It's gone through an evolution over the last few years in terms of its critical minerals strategy, as well as its designated critical minerals list. There was an update to the critical minerals strategy in 2023. The list of critical minerals has expanded to 30 in terms of minerals as well as groups of minerals. And it also has introduced a strategic materials list, which I've listed there: copper, nickel, aluminium, phosphorus, tin, and zinc, which don't necessarily meet the full criteria for a critical mineral, but have certain elements and aspects related to it that deem it a strategic material as opposed to a critical mineral. It did add 6 minerals to the list in 2023: fluorine, molybdenum, arsenic, selenium, and tellurium. And it also removed helium from the critical minerals list. But in general, you could say that the Australian list pretty much aligns now with some of the other international strategic partners. So the focus for Australia's critical minerals list is that it is the broader strategic application of the minerals, as well as supporting the global push to net zero and for the energy transition, and also those minerals for which Australia has particular geological potential to be able to enable that future, as well as to meet and support demand from strategic international partners. So there was extensive consultation that took place for the Australian critical minerals strategy. Over on the right-hand side of the screen there is some of the key elements that Australia has recommended in terms of key outcomes and what will be key success measures for the critical minerals strategy. So it is about developing strategically important projects, upstream mining projects, as well as processing and advanced manufacturing projects. Attracting investment and developing and strengthening international partnerships is a key aspect of the strategy. First Nations engagement and benefit sharing, and that sort of also ties in with the responsible production and ESG factors related to upstream minerals development, and promoting Australia as a world leader, which it is in terms of ESG performance in upstream mineral supply chains. The strategy also has a key element around unlocking investment in enabling infrastructure as well as other services, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, but also about growing a skilled workforce and capacity and capability in the critical minerals supply chains. So in terms of, the capability side, in terms of leveraging our mining capacity, I think Australia arguably has, some of the strongest geological reserves and resources of any country in terms of its minerals potential, but also its critical minerals potential. And it is also has a very strong expertise at extracting the minerals in a responsible way, as well as being a very strong regulatory environment in terms of the extraction industries, and it is a reliable producer and exporter of energy and resources. So our critical minerals strategy is very much underpinned by the richness of our resource base, And, you know, there is an obvious angle to be growing our geostrategic and economic strength in that way, and to be globally significant producer of critical minerals, as well as the processing of critical minerals, and to really play that critical role in being a diverse and resilient and sustainable supply chain. So it's our diversity of our mineral base and our ability and demonstrated ability to unlock our extractive industries is really a key part of our strengths. So touching on uranium, it's not part of our critical mineral list. We're not, but we are ranked #1 for resources, and we're also ranked #4 for supply. I guess, you know, a couple of reasons why it wouldn't be designated as a critical minerals. It doesn't actually neatly fit the criteria for what makes up the critical minerals list. It is not like a critical mineral is typically defined by the essential use in certain technologies and industries, and also linked to supply chain disruption, as well as the importance to an economy or national security. So while it's a critical input to the nuclear power industry, Australia itself doesn't have a, you know, domestic nuclear power industry, so it's not necessarily part of our own supply chain mix. We're predominantly an exporter of uranium, and also depending on how different jurisdictions classify uranium, and whether it's sort of noted as a part of manufacturing and technology inputs, or whether fuel sources are categorised as a critical mineral, would designate whether a jurisdiction would have that on their own list. But certainly for Australia, it doesn't necessarily meet that criteria. Also, uranium itself, in terms of trade flows, is typically a critical mineral, would have risks associated with supply. And uranium supply chains are actually considered generally stable. Australia has one of, you know, the largest reserves, as well as being a major exporter, and it's also highly regulated in terms of its trade flows. So it's not necessarily a you know, risks in terms of market stability. And also there's also diversity in terms of the supply chain. So we're not the only producer. There are several other producers globally that are part of upstream uranium supply. Also, it is an export-driven market in Australia, so it may not necessarily be on the list in terms of our own use. And also, as I mentioned, it's a highly regulated environment in terms of the mining and exporting of uranium. And so because of those stringent regulations and the public sensitivity around nuclear energy, it actually is fairly well you know, regulated in terms of its trade flows already. But that doesn't mean that it won't change in the future in terms of being whether a strategic material list or eventually on a critical minerals list, depending on how the industry shapes up in the future. I thought the chart on the right-hand side was quite interesting as part of the recent Office of the Chief Economist, Resources and Energy Quarterly, noting how the global uranium industry is certainly increasing in terms of the deployment of nuclear power, is broadening as well as accelerating. And as uranium in terms of a raw material plays such an important role in that, the supply chains could well shift over time, depending on how that industry plays out. So in terms of you know, opportunities to unlock critical minerals potential, I just wanted to touch on the mining equipment, technology and services sector, which is, you know, I've had quite a bit of experience in this area in terms of the inputs and service providers and industries that make up what we have as a world-leading mining jurisdiction. The makeup of a mining equipment technology services sector is very much interconnected, where we have a very broad and robust ecosystem. We have underpinned by government and community, as well as strong capital flows, really strong research and applied research and fundamental research in our resources sector. We have a very strong and broad mining equipment technology and services sector, such as small startups all the way through to small SMEs that are providing targeted solutions, as well as larger equipment and component and service providers that all feed into a well-established, mature mining industry, which is made up of explorers, which make up one part of the industry, that are all about discovery of new ore bodies, as well as tier 1 miners and tier 2 and 3 junior miners moving into mid-tier operators. So when we look at the whole ecosystem, what we've over time, the METS sector really covers the entire value chain of mining. We have a very rich industry base in terms of being able to service and provide solutions for the resources industry, everything from discovery all the way through to development and production, as well as remediation and closure. So we are world leading in the entire value chain, as well as the different demographic of what makes up those services. So the reason I wanted to paint that picture is that as industries evolve, such as the nuclear industry, as upstream segments evolve, such as potentially the uranium sector in Australia, as well as the nuclear industries in Australia, it is that building out of the existing robust ecosystems that will play to our strengths. So there will be a range of different technologies that will be in development and will be moving through the technology curve. And it is our strength in applied research and our ability to evolve and be part of a dynamic ecosystem that will start to both collaborate, share knowledge, but also develop solutions that would be part of an industry in the future. So there's an enormous opportunity and competitive advantage that Australia has to be able to leverage its already very robust and mature mining equipment technology and services and advanced manufacturing sector in a way to be able to participate and lead the way about providing solutions for the future industries of the future. And as you mentioned, Michael, the technology never stands still. So there's plenty of opportunity ahead of us. So I'll probably leave it there.
Thank you, Claire. And you've got your contact details there. If anyone would like to reach out to Claire, please feel free. Again, we are recording this session and we will put it up on the YouTube. So people can comment on the LinkedIn post that will come inevitably. But hey, how great is this to have nuclear law and critical minerals and mining and a great range of speakers today, which we hope to expand on over the coming months. So please feel free to engage with us. And you can see the bios of our speakers today on the Nuclear Task Force website, which is nucleartaskforce.com. So thank you, Claire. That's terrific. Our next speaker is Jaz Diab, who not only is a nuclear engineer, but has a military background. She serves on the advisory board here with us at the Nuclear Task Force, but she has also joined the advisory board of the AUKUS Forum under Arthur Sinodinos, former US ambassador, and Joel Fitzgibbon, our former defence minister, as our co-chair. So we're grateful that Jaz could make the time to join us today. And we have a video that we've been taking all around the country that Jaz put together to share the story about the nuclear opportunity. So I'll just play that, which goes for 10 minutes, and then we'll have a chat with Jaz at the end of this.
Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the AUKUS Forum and to share my experiences and knowledge as both an active member of the Australian nuclear community, as well as an Australian Army veteran who I'm doing my best to speak civilian and business, but I'm really excited at the opportunity to have nuclear included in Australian conversations to ensure that our future has Australian sovereign capabilities able to work off global best practice from our allies and partners. I'm currently a partner and managing director for Global Nuclear Security Partners Australia. We're a startup company looking to highlight the importance of nuclear security and threat assessments from the early stages of working within the nuclear fuel cycle on both civilian and military applications, as well as bridging the gap between nuclear safety and security. I'm also the president of Women in Nuclear Australia and an active member of the Women in Nuclear global community. This is a true passion project where we strive for workforce diversity and inclusion, as well as ensuring that social licence is achieved through sharing experiences of communities with nuclear technologies in their backyard. And it also opens the door to a network of global nuclear experts in all facets of nuclear and radiological technologies. Now, Australia's history with nuclear is an interesting one. We're a highly regarded global citizen in the nuclear space with 70 years of successful operation.
I'll be back soon, Baba.
Australian Nuclear
I'm going to the dentist, get my teeth checked.
Organisation, or ANSTO, at Lucas Heights. They produce not just neutrons for research and technology outcomes, but also our nuclear medicine production, which every Australian will get the support from in their lifetime. Our high standard of nuclear regulation in safety, security and safeguards by the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, or ARPANSA, and the Australian Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office, or ASNO, ensures that Australia is primed to support global nuclear operations through the expertise of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, as well as other global nuclear institutions. Yet we are also part of a very small community of countries that have legislation banning the use of nuclear technologies for energy production. Now, I'm not here to talk about nuclear energy. However, what has resulted from these decisions is a country where nuclear has been a taboo topic and the general public is interested in nuclear, but limited to the opportunities to understand the wide and diverse applications of nuclear technologies to help shape industry and society. This has meant that we have a real nuclear literacy gap. We don't fully understand the true opportunities nuclear technology can provide Australia. With support from the Australian government, schools and academia are getting investment to teach nuclear science and engineering, which will in time be able to meet this literacy gap. However, requirements for skills and knowledge in the current workforce to meet the nuclearised needs of our future is needed to upskill Australian industry and to ensure that Australia is best placed to be partner as part of AUKUS and part of the wider nuclear community. With the announcement of Australia's exciting decision to pursue nuclear technologies through submarine propulsion, the time is now to upskill and educate more of the Australian public on nuclear, how it works, what the international and national regulations are, and to ensure the safe and secure uses of nuclear technologies and radiological technologies as well. This ensures that we can look at things like supply chain assurance to support industry, as well as being able to support other parts of our AUKUS partners' technologies as they expand as well. This is something we can be a part of as part of the AUKUS Forum Nuclear Taskforce, with tailored short courses to introduce nuclear to make it less of a taboo topic. Now, while I can't give a nuclear masterclass in 20 minutes, through this presentation, I give a quick snapshot of the nuclear fuel cycle and how Australia already contributes, or where there are opportunities for us to contribute in the future. First is mining and milling. Now, Australia possesses 1/3 of the world's uranium reserves and has mined uranium since the 1950s. All Australian uranium oxide is mined and milled and exported. And as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, our obligations mean that we only export uranium to power production purposes. Currently, it's only legal to mine uranium in South Australia, Western Australia and Northern Territory. The next stage is conversion, which allows us to transfer uranium oxide, or yellow cake as it's colloquially called, to be converted into uranium hexafluoride gas to support enrichment. This does not occur in Australia. Following conversion is enrichment, which is normally done through centrifuges. While it's illegal to enrich uranium here in Australia, the Silex laser enrichment technology was actually developed by Australian scientists. It demonstrates the innovation in nuclear that already occurs domestically. Now, Silex is an Australian business, but it's now out for commercial production in the United States and Canada, which is pretty exciting for them. Fuel fabrication is next and is heavily dependent on the reactor type and materials available to form the fuel. Now, while Australia does not fabricate fuel, future demand for global energy markets for nuclear fuel, thanks to a lot of reliance on Russian nuclear fuel, means that there's opportunities existing for fuel fabrication into the future if Australia is serious about getting into the nuclear game. Next is fuel use, and Australia has 70 years experience of operating nuclear reactors at Lucas Heights. And in time, we'll also have the experience of fuel use from nuclear propelled submarines. The final three parts of the nuclear fuel cycle are called the back end of the cycle. So spent fuel that's come straight out of the reactor, storage occurs on site. And for permanent reactor structures, these are built into the reactor design. And for mobile reactors, so like submarines, for example, they're placed in a secure, assured facility on land. Now, the fuel cools in these spent fuel storage facilities until it's ready to be reprocessed and recycled. Now, over 90% of spent fuel can be recycled to form other new fuel types, with the remaining waste requiring processing to be stored long-term. Australia continues to conduct research into spent fuel at ANSTO and to find further ways that fuel can be recycled and treated, reducing long-term waste product. Now, the final step here is waste disposal, and Australia already has nuclear and radiological waste. Most of it is stored on site at ANSTO in Lucas Heights, with plans for Australia to build a radioactive waste facility into the future, and the site is still to be confirmed. However, there is already Australian industry getting ahead here, with an established low-level waste facility based out of Western Australia and the opportunity to establish an intermediate waste facility into the future. So Telus Holdings have, through trust and good social licence, already been able to build and license and operate one of very few globally established commercial radioactive waste facilities out at Sandy Ridge, and they've already accepted significant quantities of waste into this facility. Now, this overview hasn't been comprehensive by any stretch. However, what I've hoped to highlight is that being a part of the nuclear fuel cycle has many opportunities for Australian business and industry. The other massive advantage that we have here is that we're building our nuclear industry from a relatively clean slate. The current workforce has built fantastic foundations for us to grow from. So we need to learn lessons from our partners, especially those from the UK and US, through technology, governance and shared networks, to ensure that the industry that we have in Australia to support the nuclear side of the country is first and foremost safe, but also secure in all forms, so physical, cyber, global security. This will reduce threats to our population, our regional partners, and allow us to remain good global citizens in the nuclear community. Through the AUKUS Forum and specifically the Nuclear Taskforce, as well as my role within Global Nuclear Security Partners, I'm motivated to help ensure Australia can establish a good foundation for the nuclear industry to build sovereign specialists and capabilities. The Nuclear Masterclass is really the first step in raising awareness about nuclear and lifting that Australian nuclear literacy, so that we can help upskill our current workforce and the workforce into the future. So thank you very much. The Nuclear Forum's website is just up on the slide there, and I appreciate you listening in. Thanks.
And Jazz, it is great that you could join us today. That video has been tremendously received all around the country. Would you like to add anything to that today? Because a lot of it's going to be around the skills uplift, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right, Sharpe. I guess the only thing I'd add is that in people being nuclear curious, it gives us great opportunity to see what else we can be involved in around the nuclear industry in Australia. And so I encourage everyone to ask the tough questions and find the information out about nuclear to see just how you can be involved. Thanks.
Yeah, very much so. And we certainly appreciate your support. And the conversation continues to expand. So as I've said, this is recorded. It will go up on the AUKUS Forum YouTube channel, so you can Google that. But we'll also put it all up on the LinkedIn platforms for the Nuclear Task Force. And you'll see it on the AUKUS Forum LinkedIn page as well. So please get involved. Please add your own comments. Please send us questions. And we'll be gathering again this same time next month. Many thanks to our speakers today. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a good day.